if the mayor will, I don't know if the mayor will adopt that recommendation, but we did recommend that. We didn't recommend any additional increases to any other weights. So that's just something to keep in mind right now, that other than the base and the foundation, other than the base and the UPSFF, the mayor is not proposing any additional increases to the UPSFF. Next slide, please. So when we look at the initial budgets for Ward 5, we have to start with looking at enrollment. And I actually see a question really quickly about how does DC define at risk? Great question. So in DC, a student is designated at risk if they are in the foster care system, if they are over age in high school, or if they live in a household that is eligible for SNAP or TANF. And am I missing any? I think those are the main categories, but the Deputy Mayor for Education defined what it means for students to be at risk, and then those students are identified for DCPS and the public charter schools. So just continuing with this conversation. So when we think about initial school budgets, the primary driver for a school's budget is going to be its projected enrollment. And so if we look at what DCPS projected for Ward 5 schools, about half of Ward 5 schools, DCPS schools, are projected to grow in enrollment, while the other half are projected to lose students. And as you all can see in this chart, a particular concern is McKinley Middle School's projected enrollment. I will say that across at least wards 5, 7, and 8, the middle schools in particular are facing some pretty steep projected enrollment declines. And so I'd be curious for folks who have students at McKinley Middle or are connected to families in that school, if they have any more context here, because that is a pretty sizable projected enrollment loss of, about a quarter for McKinley, whereas the other schools are, seeing some pretty big increases. For the McKinley, I haven't heard anything specifically about McKinley. I just wonder what's going on in particular with our middle schools in DC in general, because as I said, in 7 and 8, we're seeing similar declines, like up to 0.25%, of students projected to no longer be in some of the middle schools there as well. So I wonder what's happening just in general with the middle school population in DC. So if folks, again, can learn more there, I think that would be super important, because as I said, a school's projected enrollment is the primary driver of its budget. And with a school losing, that number of students, that can really destabilize a school's budget. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? So that said, this year, for Ward 5 schools, as you can see, most budgets are increasing, just based off of what we have in the DCPS initial budgets. I want to turn your attention to McKinley, because if you look at McKinley, even though DCPS is projecting that 25% enrollment loss, DCPS is limiting the budget cut for McKinley to 5%. Now, that doesn't mean that McKinley deserves a 5% cut, but I think it is some important context here that enrollment is an issue for some of our schools, and DCPS is faced, and is confronted with trying to figure out how does it stabilize some of these schools where enrollment declines are pretty big or pretty large. But overall, we can see that our high schools, like Dunbar is seeing a pretty sizable in budget growth over its 23 submitted budget. Langdon and a few other schools are seeing some increases. So some other context that I think is just helpful for you all to understand. So, during the pandemic, the mayor slash DCPS, the DME, they, added additional money to stabilize some schools' budgets. And that money was really there to help, deal with enrollment losses as well as address, learning loss needs for students. When I looked at the Ward 5 schools, I did see that not that many schools in Ward 5 are receiving stability funding. The outlier being McKinley. McKinley has about like $450 or so $1,000 in stability funding. And I can't tell, I know a part of it is part of the mayor's recovery fund, which is a one-time fund. And then there's some other stabilization dollars that to me at this point, it's not clear if it's one time or not, but let's just say it is, right? 400 and something $1,000 of one-time funding for McKinley. The district is going to need to make sure that the school can be stabilized, moving beyond fiscal year 24. So I really did just want to look at what's going on with stability funding. How many schools in Ward 5 are being propped up by one-time money that will spell trouble in fiscal year 25? And I know we're just trying to get through 24, but I think it's important to think about the next fiscal year, even because so much one-time money is propping up school budgets across the district, not as much in Ward 5. Relatedly, all but one schools in Ward 5 are receiving their last tranche of ESSER funding. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, ESSER funding was part of the federal COVID federal relief packages. There were 3 different ESSER funds, and these dollars had to be spent through September 30th, 2024. So this is the last year that schools will receive ESSER funding. DCPS is treating these dollars as supplemental, but it's important to keep in mind that many schools are relying on ESSER funds to just pay for the basics, to be quite honest with you, because their budgets, the budgets that they're getting at the local level from like DC government dollars simply isn't enough to keep up with needs. And so next slide, please. I think there are really important questions for us to be considering. So like, we can look at the data, we can see that, okay, on paper, budgets are going up for a lot of Ward 5 schools, but I think there are questions that we need to ask, right? Importantly, how accurate are the projected enrollments at my school? I know that during my time at DCFPI, I've spoken with various school communities who are like, look, after count day, we receive a lot more students at our schools, but we don't get requisite resources to support these students. So what happens when a school is, projected to lose students, but in reality, they're gaining students through the mid-year and they're not receiving any more money? Even if your school is, getting an increase, is that enough to keep up with rising costs and student needs? Like, those are separate questions. And sometimes I think the way that the DME and the mayor and DCPS talk about it is like, well, this school's budget is going up, but is it enough? Like, it doesn't necessarily matter that it's going up. The question is it enough? Relatedly, at-risk funds, those dollars are supposed to specifically target students who are at risk of academic failure. And what we know from the DC auditor, as well as like longtime budget expert Mary Levy, is that oftentimes schools are having to use their at-risk dollars to pay for general education services. So they're not even able to provide additional resources. So this is another question that you should be asking yourselves as you're working with, if you're on your LSAT or you're working with your school in some other capacity and you are involved in the budgeting, ask those questions, because those dollars are supposed to be on top of what you should get just as, you know, a DCPS school. And then lastly, how has your school invested ESSER funding in the years prior? What resources will your school lose once ESSER and other one-time funds run out? I think this is an important question, because when you're talking, if you end up testifying or you're, again, in any conversation about budgets, it's important to highlight that, yes, these dollars were one time, but these dollars are funding long-term needs. And it's not enough for us to just say, well, they were always one time, too bad. There has to be a plan, because we know now more than ever, students need more resources, educators as well. And it's going to be insufficient to just say, we can't do anything about, you know, those resources that schools have been relying on, resources that are probably making a huge difference, right, in students' experiences. And for the city to just say, well, we're not going to replace them, we don't have a plan to replace them, is unacceptable. So I'm going to leave y'all with those questions to consider. And then next slide, please. So what are some actions you can take? I highly encourage you to join your local school advisory team or your LSAT if you're not already on it. And or also join the DC LSAT Collective, which is basically like a group of various folks from different LSATs across the district, where they go to share information, where they, you know, strategize, think about how they can advocate for what they need across their schools. That is a great place for you to be. And yeah, I can drop the links in the chat. And also, I'm fine with this slide deck being sent out, and there are hyperlinks in it as well. I skipped over one other action. So tomorrow, the mayor is going to release her budget proposal, and it sounds like she's going to do that in front of the Wilson building, and folks are, you know, welcome to go down to the Wilson building while the mayor is announcing her budget. Oh, MLK Library. Okay, it's at the MLK Library, not the Wilson building, where you can be there in person while the mayor is talking about what's in her budget proposal. But if you can't make that, there is going to be a council briefing where the mayor and her budget team will have to answer questions from the council on the budget. And so that's this Friday at 12 p.m. And like I said, it's virtual. I think this third action is really, really important. Please sign up to testify at the committee of the whole budget hearing on April 5th. And I would encourage, you know, any students and families, you know, to do so as well. This hearing is really a good opportunity for the Chairman Mendelson in particular, but all council members to hear from DC residents about what's needed, because once the mayor releases her budget proposal, it's going to go through the different committees and they're going to mark up the budget, where they have the opportunity to make changes that based off of what the public asked the council to do. And then lastly, you know, Councilmember Parker, he'll be joining us today, but contact him and other council members. You can email them. You can also reach them on Twitter. Many council members are active on Twitter. And so if you're on Twitter, I would add them. I would share your concerns and your budget needs with them, because it's really important that they don't just hear the narrative from the mayor's office or, you know, the DME, but they actually hear from folks on the ground who are experiencing the budgets. And so those are my quick updates. I want to go through the chat. I'm seeing what questions people have. Okay, people. Let me see some. Scott, I don't know the direct answer to your question. I'm wondering if anybody from Dunbar is here that could speak to that. I know Dunbar's enrollment is up. they're seeing quite a bit of growth in enrollment, which is like on trend with quite a bit of the high schools across the district. High schools are doing good in terms of enrollment. Folks are sharing things about McKinley Middle and what some of the needs are there. And in terms of ESSER tracking, Robert shared that one tool. I would say, I don't think DC has done the best job in terms of ESSER, like data transparency. I mean, even with the tool that you shared, Robert, it doesn't really give us like specifics, right? And since the beginning of the pandemic, we know that the city kind of went full-fledged in high impact tutoring. So we know that's where a large portion of the ESSER funding went, both on like Aussie's side, but also what was encouraged for the LEAs. But if I hear of any other data sources that might give more information, I will definitely share that out. And somebody is asking about Aussie and STEM.
Hi, yes. I'm a STEM educator at John Barrows Elementary School. So I do expos yearly. I have government agencies at these expos and community stakeholders, but I'm very interested in knowing about and first of all, I advocate 21st century STEM education because 21st century STEM education is what catches students, is what birth seeds of engineers and scientists into our students at a very young age. And this is something that they can't get in the traditional, English classroom or perhaps social studies classroom. All education is important, but I feel that 21st century education is something that should be promoted, and it should be promoted, in the district more. And I think that I just want to know, I guess, the answer to, what is the mayor, or how can we solicit the mayor to focus on STEM more? What grants can be written so that STEM schools can have monies to support STEM programming and to bring these programs into schools? And what grants does Aussie have that STEM teachers and STEM educators such as myself can apply for? I mean, my STEM room doesn't have technology devices, amongst other things. Like, I want to bring more STEM programming in, and I need, the money to do so. I need the grants to do so. And also, I also want to advocate, really, each ward should have an academic STEM director. And one STEM school should be following the same layout as another STEM school. And that's not what I'm seeing across the district. So what can be done so that the mayor can open up a position potentially for academic STEM director?
Yeah, I mean, so the deputy mayor for education, he is like, well, that office, let me not just say he, that office kind of sets the vision for like public education in DC, right? And so I know that a big focus for them, they are focused on like dual enrollment, CTE, right? Like they have sort of their set of priorities that they are going, all in on. And so I honestly think that, advocating for the DME to make STEM education more of a priority as like part of their roadmap to recovery, et cetera, all the language that they use, right, to get DCPS student or to get DC public school students on the right track and, graduated and to have success after school. The DME has a lot of say over that. And so I would, you have a question? Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. Let me mute myself. I was just running.
Okay.
You just explained about the DMV a little bit more. I'm not familiar
Yeah,
with.
the deputy mayor for education.
Okay.
So the deputy mayor for education basically sees all of like public education from like, pre-K all the way through like post-college, like college and career, essentially. So just at my time at DCFPI, I know that the DME has invested quite a bit into like looking at dual enrollment and CTE, and now there's a lot of focus as well as on like youth workforce development. And so like those seem to be the main priorities among the administration. And so I think again, having conversations with the DME about the need to prioritize STEM in the way that you talked about it would be really important, because the DME is then going to, OSCE, is then going to DCPS, is then, talking to all the agencies underneath that office's cluster about like what their priorities should be. And so that's why I think the DME is somebody that you would want to influence.
Do you know who that person is, point of contact? Who is the deputy mayor of education? I think
Paul,
I had it.
Paul Kine. I think Clara Botstein would probably be the best person for you to talk to. Clara Botstein. I can put her email address in the chat.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Qubilah, Annie Wright has her hand up. Annie,
Okay.
you can go ahead.
Yes. Hey, Ms. Huddleston. Just wanted to say thank you.
We lost you, Annie. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? No.
We can hear you.
We can hear
Can
you
you hear
now.
me better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I said, I know earlier in your presentation, you spoke about the enrollment for McKinley. My son was a class of 2021, Langley Elementary School. Go Tigers.
Annie, I'm afraid we lost you again.
Oh my God. Can you hear me better now? Or
Yeah, the last
feel
thing we
bad?
heard you is you said go Tigers.
Yes. And as I was doing my research for middle schools, like I said, Van McKinley is the feeder school for Langley, and was very excited about, wanting to send my son there. It was very little communication. And like I said, I wasn't very impressed with the standards and things that I was learning of McKinley. So we end up going to Brooklyn Middle School opposed to McKinley. But, and like I said, like Dory had mentioned in the chat, unfortunately, a lot of parents did end up, sending their kids to the feeder school and were unsatisfied and end up pulling them out. Actually, a couple of the kids came over to Brooklyn. So, but, I am excited about the advocacy for McKinley, because I understand that it's a great neighborhood school. And trust me, it is extremely frustrating for another 15-20 minute commute to go all the way to Brooklyn when, I could have dropped them right there in McKinley, which would not have changed my commute. But as far as, wanting the best education for our kids, which is, everyone's goal here, mainly on the call, is, wanting the best for our kids, I end up, making the decision myself as a parent going to Brooklyn opposed to McKinley. Thank you.
And then Yvette, I see your hand raised.
Hi, so my name is Yvette Selby, and I just wanted to echo the comments about the STEM and STEM programming and the importance of that, and especially being able to have a feeder school. And when I look at McKinley Tech, my son currently attends there. He's a senior, and I think their programming is really good. It has the potential to be better because they've dealt with some teacher shortages or teacher outages in the sciences, where that sort of impedes their ability to offer certain courses. When you set this up as a STEM school and a selected school for high schoolers, one of the things that I think I get a little bit Preston want to push for is, where are the STEM middle schools in Ward 5 that are feeding into, the STEM focused schools when they get into high school? What is the prep for that? So that, by 8th grade, they're in algebra. They've already taken algebra in middle school. So then when they're in 9th grade, they're in geometry, they're getting into pre-calculus, they're getting into calculus, as well as their other STEM focused programming. And I think that, we need to really do some pushing around this area. The other area that I think that is going to be important is, in order to create a STEM workforce, you have to be proficient in math. And our scores for our kids are really low in math and decreased over, the time that we were in COVID. And so what kind of specialty teachers, what kind of things do we need to put in place so that we can build good, solid programming in STEM to give our kids more opportunities? And you don't have to always go to college to be part of the STEM workforce. There's IT, information technology, coding, certifications, and all of these things that you can use or get that are outside the college and get them ready and prepared for a workforce, and especially a global workforce. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that some of I don't know how much, I don't know all the ins and outs of the boundary study, but I think paying attention to that and contributing when there's an opportunity to forcing that to be part of the conversation, I think is key. Because I know across the district, there are all these conversations about how jacked up the feeder patterns are, right? And I think that on the DCPS side in particular, right, the lack of intention to the middle schools, right, is causing, problems that have immediate but also longer term ramifications. And the DME, we need to help them connect all these dots, right? Let's stop making siloed policy decisions and let's articulate. One thing that I know I kept advocating for when I was at DCFPI is we need a plan. What is the vision for public education in DC? We have 70 LEAs, we have 200 and something schools. What is our plan, right? So yes, love to hear that. Sharice?
Qubilah, we're gonna try and squeeze Councilmember Parker in real quickly because he's got other stuff on his agenda. But
Okay,
we will come back to Sharice and Anna Rodriguez after that. Zachary, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Testing. Can you hear me? Okay, yes, I see head nods. Good evening, everyone. I am going to be brief. As Robert mentioned, I do have to jump to an evening meeting, but I did want to come share just some of the education priorities that are on my radar. I also want to hear from you if there are things that I should be thinking about. As you know, 9 a.m. tomorrow, the mayor will unveil her budget at the MLK Library before the council. There will be a formal introduction of the budget on Friday at the council, where we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. And so if you do have questions, I would encourage you to reach out to your favorite council member or members in hopes that they can do some digging for you. Before I share, and I do just want to see if I have capacity to share my screen, and it looks like I do, which is great. I wanted to just address a few things that I heard. One, I have had a chance to visit and talk with the team at McKinley Tech. They did get supplemental funding from DCPS after their initial budget. And right now they are down one behavioral tech, which I think that is related to discipline or behavior, as the name implies. But it is, they are in a better position than they were when the original budget came out, when they were down a special education resource, amongst other things. I would also just highlight that McKinley and both the middle and high school have a number of outstanding DGS requests, as do a lot of our schools. In terms of Dunbar, I know there was a question around funding. A large part of the huge investment in Dunbar is because of the turnaround grant or the reimagining grant that they have, and that work is ongoing. A question that I have, and something that it will be helpful for you all to keep an eye on, is how much does Dunbar have a say in how that money is spent versus central office dictating how that money is spent? So more to come there. Happy to answer more questions, but I'm going to try and share my screen and go through this pretty quickly. I know everyone is not familiar with my team, so I just want to do a very quick intro here. The 7 individuals I have the privilege of working with on behalf of Ward 5 residents. You can reach us generally at ward5contact@dc.gov or reach us by phone at 202-724-8028. My email is zparker@dccouncil.gov, and we would love to hear from you. If you're not already engaged or signed up on our newsletter, I encourage you to do so. We have ongoing office hours. Those office hours will be disrupted and or truncated over the next few weeks as we have an onslaught of budget hearings, but they are weekly. And then those are my handles for social media. Just a few highlights, and I'm intentionally going through this quickly because I want to get to the budget stuff, which is the bulk of what I want to spend my time on. We have launched a Ward 5 bus task force. That is important for families and children as they are traversing across the city. We have a once in a generation opportunity to inform how WMATA is thinking about expanding bus access in the city, but also in Ward 5. And this task force is going to be dedicated around which line should we extend, which line should we bring back, which services could be better, et cetera, et cetera. Also, the DC Auditor's report on Vision Zero, if you haven't already seen it, it is out. And I talk about that on an upcoming slide. And then last but not least, there are extended hours at 8 select DPR rec centers starting on March 27th. Those include Turkey Thicket and Edgewood rec centers as of April, and that is a general date. And so I'm going to generally think April 1st, but it realistically is probably by the end of April, all rec centers will have extended hours. And so if I'm not mistaken, I believe those hours are 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. during the weekdays and 9 a.m. To 6 p.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. I can confirm that. Again, here's the task force information. If you are interested, at the bottom, you'll see ward5.us/bus. That is a way you can sign up. You can also just shoot us an email. The auditor's report, there's a lot of good information in there. 2 big headlines. One, the city has failed on Vision Zero. And we see that as incidents and tragedies and violence and harm and death continue to rise. The second most important headline is Wards 5, 7, and 8 continue to lead the pack in terms of traffic fatalities and deaths. And so it is going to be important for us to think about how do we keep our school communities, our children, our families safe, even as they are traversing to and from school. This week, I am planning to release a public safety plan for Ward 5. There are going to be a number of strategies, indicators, things you can hold my office accountable to in the work that we're doing every day to keep communities safe. Just this afternoon, I met with petite scholars, families. I was over at Turkey Thicket and Brentwood rec centers, trying to be responsive to the gun violence that we saw last week. And I talked about this. I'm getting to the budget. Quick legislation news. I and several of my colleagues, and that includes Chairman Mendelson, Council members Allen, Henderson, Lewis, George, Nadeau, Pinto, Robert White, and Trayon White, introduced the DC Child Tax Credit. If implemented, it would give $500 per child, up to 3 children, to families filing a tax return. And that is incomes up to $120,000 or joint earners up to $175,000. You may be thinking like, wow, that is a high bar. And that is because we realize the cost of living in DC is high, and childcare costs are high for middle earners and poor folk, to put it frankly. And so we wanted to include as many people in that benefit as possible. I encourage you to come out and support when this is held in hearing, and share how you too could be a benefit of, or you could benefit from the child tax credit. Just today, I was proud to introduce the Financial Support for Families with Children Amendment Act of 2023. Shout out to council members Allen, Lewis, George, Pinto, and Robert White. This is a version of a guaranteed income, and it targets our poorest children in the district. And so families making $10,000 or less, or joint earners making up to $20,000, they would get up to $1,000 cash per child. And that could be received in lump sum, or that could be broken up over months. Why are these things important? Because I know, many of you all know, research tells us as we raise the economic floor for our children and for our families, we see improved academic outcomes, health outcomes, life expectancy outcomes, and the list goes on. Again, I would encourage you to come out and support this when it is held up for a hearing. Now, the budget. Tomorrow is the big day for the budget's mayor's budget release, and the clock starts. And so by law, there is a set amount of time from the mayor's initiation of the budget to the council voting on it twice. And that is about 72 days, and I can get that specific time. But we have a specific amount of time that we have to pass the budget, and you'll see the process here, and the mayor kicks that off tomorrow. And then several weeks ago on February 16th, I sent over a letter to the mayor detailing Ward 5 budget asks, and that centered on things I heard from residents through an online budget forum, a budget forum I held at Woodridge Library, as well as my engagement with school communities, parents, neighbors, residents across the ward. I'm not going to go through all of this. I will, let's see if I can multitask here. In the chat, I'm going to drop the link to the budget letter in case you have not already received it. Many of you may have already seen it, but in case you haven't, I just dropped in the chat. I will highlight a few things, and I would love to open it up to hear from you. What are things that should be on my radar as we move forward in this process? You heard me talk about the child tax credit. So we will be pushing to fund those pieces of legislation that will put more money in folks' pocket to raise the economic floor for families. We have advocated for raising the UPSFF. That is how, that is essentially our per pupil funding mechanism in the district. And the mayor has already increased that. And so kudos to her that, and in large part, she has to keep up with inflation, salary adjustments, and et cetera. We are pushing for increased investments in school-based behavioral health. While we have made progress here, there is a tremendous amount of work that is needed. By law, our schools are supposed to have DBH counselors. They're supposed to have nurses and mental health supports and wraparound supports. And we know for a host of reasons, including workforce shortages, many of our schools don't have those. I was just talking with Robert and others a few weeks ago when we discovered that Brooklyn Middle, for instance, doesn't have a DBH counselor, and it turned out there isn't a plan to get them one in the near future. There are many other schools that don't have them. And when I pressed the DBH director, Bazaron, in our oversight hearing, the response was because of the workforce shortages, they are working trying to get every school at least something. So if you have a DBH counselor or school counselor or some type of intervention model, they're trying to make sure every school has at least something. I know that is not satisfying, and I'm going to continue to push, but just in case you had a question. We're pushing for expanded food access and nutrition programming in Ward 5, equitable access and improved out-of-school time programming, efforts to bolster teacher retention. I was a proud co-sponsor of legislation that just came out where Councilmember Robert White was leading the legislation on efforts to increase teacher retention. Things that I am personally passionate about is seeing how we can afford teachers stipends for student loans as an incentive to get them to stay in the classroom. I can tell you as a person that has student loans, that would make me think twice. I also know we're giving a lot of incentives to police officers and other workforces, and those incentives should be shared across workforces. And then last but not least, expanded programming at Ward 5 rec centers to just make sure our young people have more activities and access to the rec centers themselves. One of the things we've heard in Edgewood loud and clear is that we have a state-of-the-art facility, but Edgewood youth don't always have access to the Edgewood Rec Center because youth from around the city are coming and either playing soccer or football or using the rec center grounds, which preclude Edgewood youth from actually taking advantage. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I probably went way too fast through some of that. And I'm happy to open it up for questions. I see there are some questions. Loretta, I'm going to go to you first, and then Sharice, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you for all of that, Zachary.
Yes.
And hello, I haven't seen you in a really long time. I'm guessing you've been a little busy.
Just a little bit.
So my question is regarding like post-secondary education, preparation for post-secondary education for our public school students. Are there things in the works to put in something like to work with the education standards to create some pathways for our young people to prepare them for pathways into post-secondary education, like to prepare, like not everybody's ready for college, but to for something to work towards instead of just graduation, but what's happening after graduation for our young people, because they're not prepared. Like even some of our young people that are in the charter schools don't have counselors that are ready to prepare them for college and after high school. What's going on inside our public high schools?
Great question. We have a lot of work to do before our kids graduate and to improve the graduation rates in general. But to your point, we should also be thinking about the long-term success of our students even after they've left our system. Two things I would flag. There is a lot of serious conversation around tailoring the DC TAG program to make sure it is more equitable and it is meeting the actual costs of out-of-state colleges and tuitions. More to come on that. Also, and I don't want to get ahead of the deputy mayor, but I know that there are preliminary conversations around doing some career mapping with school curricula. And this is probably a 2 to 5 year trajectory, but thinking about like, what are the future workforce areas in the district and how do we backwards map to our schools, but also how do we create pipelines, trade programs, externships, post-secondary for young people that are graduating our schools to be competitive in those areas. There's more work that we have to do in the area. And so I would love ideas if you have them. But I think a lot of people's focus, especially coming out of the pandemic, is just how do we just right the ship given many of the deficits that we saw during the pandemic?
Yeah, my first question was connected to DC TAG because just went through that process with my daughter. But yeah, the money it's great having that, but there's still a big gap between what's needed to pay for college. So
yes, yeah, and I see Laura's comment in the chat. We need leadership from the council, and so I have been pretty clear-eyed with the deputy mayor that is an area of focus. I'm planning to lean in with the deputy mayor and need and want neighbors and residents to be a part of that process. And so when I say preliminary, I think it is just an idea. And so it's my work over this year to get it to like some tangible outcome. So more to come on that.
Thank you.
Sharice?
I'm going to relinquish and yield to Dory, and then I'll come back.
Okay. Hi, Dory.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
You have been busy, I can tell.
Yes.
Thank you. Number one, thank you for your advocacy for speeding up the modernization of Langley and Burroughs. What does that, like, how are we feeling about that?
Yes.
Like, what do we think the likelihood is?
Great question. It is, if I'm being honest with you, I think it is a Hail Mary effort, right? It doesn't mean it's impossible. And a lot will depend on what the mayor does tomorrow, and we'll have a clear picture around what is possible. For those that don't know, I did in that same budget letter, I didn't mention it, but request an accelerated modernization for both Burroughs Elementary and Langley Elementary. And the reasons for that is because of the issues that both of those schools have had that have resulted in disruptions in learning and or putting student safety at risk. Most recently, Burroughs had a gas leak. Students were out of school for several days. A boiler in the middle of the night went out at Langley. And those are just high-level issues. There are a host of others. And I know there are other schools in the city, namely Whittier, that I would argue has just as severe, if not more severe issues. And so if they are going to accelerate a school, I think we're going to be up against some other schools that have some pretty grim needs as well. So I would say let's check in tomorrow about that. I'll have a clear picture about how realistic, but do know that I am going to bat for both schools. And if a modernization is not possible in the short term, I will be pushing pretty aggressively, thinking about like, what are the band-aids or the short-term fixes we could be getting at a number of our schools. I would also just throw out here, and this might get me in trouble, but it's okay. I fully support and plan to push for breaking up DGS. I think DGS is not working as an agency. I personally think we need to take school maintenance out of DGS and have that as a standalone. It is a disaster. I've been very clear about that. I am not satisfied with what we're seeing or hearing from DGS, and more to come on that. What I've learned very quickly is that things move a lot slower than I would like at the council and in the city. But that is my ultimate goal, is that we can improve the performance of that agency to improve the safety of our schools. And Sharice.
I just wanted to, my hand was up, and we definitely wanted to accommodate you, Councilmember Parker, and thank you for all that you do. Yes. I just wanted to put 3 pluggers in there. Number one, we have not stepped back, nor have we stood down on the advocacy for 2 principals at McKinley. Yes. Courtney Stafford, I mean, she's in a position where it's really a can't win because her focus is diverted. This has been an issue since Louise Jones was the principal. We vehemently advocated for a second principal if we have one to focus on the middle school. Second issue, McKinley Middle School is not the feeder for McKinley Tech. McKinley Tech, that's a misnomer. McKinley Tech is an open application school, which means any child in the District of Columbia can apply and admit. So there's the feeder, or the focus for acquiring new students is an open push throughout all 8 wards. So some people think that McKinley Middle is the feeder, and that is not true. Number 3, if I can put before you, Councilmember Parker, additional funding for all of the CTEs. We have an incredible engineering program. The students right now, there's a cluster of students that's in Dubai right now presenting, and they're award-winning, the robotics program, the biotechnology program, as well as the information systems. All 3 CTEs are NAF academies, full-fledged. And your predecessor helped us to bring biotechnology on par with the other NAF academies, the biotechnology program. It is flourishing. It is the premier major. When students come to McKinley, they are opting to be biotechnology majors. So that money, that $50,000 from the previous council member, was well spent, and it is flourishing. So I'd like to just put before you, Councilmember Parker, continued funding, because a number of our students are really doing excellent, whether they opt to go to 4-year or 2-year college institutions, or if they choose to go into the workforce. Our numbers are really, really good, and we'd like to improve those numbers as well. So I just wanted to lay those 3 issues before you to include. And by all means, we want to continue to make McKinley Tech the robust high school that it is.
Come on.
It is my understanding that McKinley Middle has a RISE principal. Miss Howard, I think is her last name, which is not the substitute for a full-time. I don't want to say real principal, but the RISE principal, as I understanding, is a principal in training. That is, I think, the model that is in place. In terms of CTE funding and programming, I fully support that. And yes, I'm fully aware that McKinley Tech is not the feeder for McKinley Middle. Two things I would just say there. They this week just got the numbers of how many students are matriculating to McKinley Tech from McKinley Middle, so it might be good to circle back with them. But they are seeing slight gains year over year of how many students are making it to McKinley Tech, which they see and many of us would see as progress. But they are also seeing attrition of community families at McKinley Middle as students get older. This is something similar that we see at Langley and a host of other schools around the ward. And the reality and the blunt truth is families are making very hard choices around, yeah, this school may be great for my kid when they're in second and third grade, or this school may be great when the kid is in sixth grade, but I have to think about where my child is going to go next. And I don't want to pass a judgment on that, but that then causes families to make some other decisions. But anyway, that is well received. I can hang around for 2 more minutes if there are any more questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to turn it back over. Well, I didn't mention it, but I will end by this. I had a conversation with Ward 5 school leaders yesterday. Thank you, Robert, for joining that conversation. Thank you to the school leaders that are here that were part of that conversation. And the point was to hear directly from school leaders around school safety and what they feel is important. 2 headlines I would give is that we have a lot of work to do and school leaders feel pretty pessimistic about school safety. That would be my take of the conversation. And they feel pessimistic about the current plans that are in place. And so today I released a press release about providing an alternative to school safety in the district that would do a few things. One, it will compel or require OSSI to convene education stakeholders and to come up with guidelines for all schools, both district and charters. 2, schools would have to produce school safety plans in alignment with those guidelines. Many schools, all schools, LEAs are already have those school safety plans. So it will be about tweaking and tailoring to meet those guidelines. 3, schools would be gifted, and by gifted meaning there would be allotted money to hire a school safety coordinator. That coordinator will have a set of responsibilities, but that would be an additional FTE, an additional capacity for the school that would not come from the school budget. At the high school level, there would be increased investments because we know at high school, we see greater challenges for safety. And then 4th, though they would assemble a school safety team which will or could include additional staff persons to keep the school grounds safe. A few things that I've heard repeatedly is that the number one concern that schools are experiencing is students traveling to and from school. There are a lot of incidents on that passage way from students going home to school. There's concerns with weapons outside of the school, less so inside of the school, and just the increased violent incidents that are stemming from social media and a host of other things. Much more to come there, but just wanted to give you a heads up that full-time employee is FTE. So they will have another staff person. And what we're trying to do is reduce the burden on schools in 2 ways. 1, staff capacity, and 2, money. And so if we can give schools more money and more staff solely dedicated to school safety, and if we could have a single vision around what is school safety in a district versus at different LEAs, I think we can move the needle, keep communities safe, and hopefully support the work their school leaders are doing. So thank you for your time. I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat. Happy to chat more, but I do have to run to another event. Back over to you, Robert or Loretta.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Parker. And we can convey anything that comes out in the remaining time to you. Can we just open it up to the whole group about anything that you haven't shared already that is of concern to you regarding the budget? What you're looking for when the mayor releases tomorrow, and then what you might want to advocate for as this process continues. I did want to say, as Qubilah mentioned, one of the opportunities is to testify at the education budget hearing on April 5th. And I just wanted to remind you about the presentation we had last month from the Office of the Student Advocate, which had some guidance on how to prepare testimony, how to engage in that way, and can also say that myself and the other officers of the Ward 5 EEC are also happy to help with that process to make you feel comfortable doing that. It can be a little bit intimidating, especially the first time, but it's we can help you kind of confront that, and it's a great way to get your voice out on those things. So if I'll just open it up to anyone who wants to share about budget issues that you would like to see on the advocacy agenda moving forward.
I have a budget question. I don't know if this is the right place, but it may be specific to the school that my kids go to, which is Burroughs, but I hope that it's not just applicable to us. I was a little bit confused about the projected increase in enrollment and decrease in budget. And I wonder if it's related possibly to the school community changing, getting like more privileged families, more neighborhood families. Like, I don't know, because I feel like it feels like they'll likely lose a staff member because of the budget if it stays the way it is. And that doesn't feel good. But I also am hesitant to advocate for something if there is like a reason behind it and take something from other schools that, you know, like just equity issues is what I'm concerned about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, you know, the chancellor and even, you know, the DME, they've tried to explain that like, hey, there are changes in the population of students at schools, right? And so like, in some schools, like they could be, you know, gaining students, but like on net, but then they've lost students who have a higher, you know, per pupil amount attached to them. So those students would be like your special education students, your English learner students, and your students designated at risk. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the resources that were necessary, right? And so I think while, you know, I can hold space for the fact that like, yeah, like if a school is losing students who, you know, are accompanied by higher per pupil amounts, like it makes sense, like the schools, you know, wouldn't have as much money, but like, what is that costing the school community, right? Like, what is that context? And that's why I think it's important for folks to like testify and to contact your council members to provide context about like what is actually happening, because I think there's just this broader picture of like schools being underfunded, right? Like there not being enough money for schools to have the basic resources that they need. And a lot of schools for a long time, when DCPS was more so making the decisions using at-risk money and like those other special pots of money to plug holes, right? Now it's kind of, oh, the schools are making those decisions, but in reality, you know, is DCPS providing enough funding for general education services to allow schools to then provide more? So I appreciate your thoughtfulness and like wanting to like interrogate that a bit more. But I would say, you know, like, what does your school community need? I wouldn't think about it as like, oh, now we're going to be taking away from this neighboring school. I would just like offer you to like speak about, you know, speak the truth about what your school community is experiencing, because again, the council members, they're going to be listening to that more than they are necessarily just seeing these, you know, numbers on paper and some, you know, generic explanation about what's going on.
Thank you.
I want to also note too that if you can't testify in person, like, you know, virtually, you can always submit written testimony to the council. And usually the hearing record closes 2 weeks after the hearing. And so that April 5th hearing is specifically on the public education agencies. DCPS is included in that. as well as the rest. And then there will be another hearing later in the budget season on the entire DC budget. So it will encompass all agencies, and that could also be another opportunity to testify and to drive home. I don't have that date off the top of my head. So really you have like at least 2 more opportunities to testify about the public education budget in front of the council.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, we do encourage you and want to support you in testifying yourself. But if you, and that can be more powerful oftentimes than going through somebody like me. But I am also happy to incorporate what you share with me into my own test. I will be testifying on the 5th. So that option is available to you as well. Anybody else with things that you're looking for, want to push for in the budget? All right, before we wrap up, I want to give Jonna Turner a chance to speak about, she did put something in the chat right at the beginning, but Jonna, we have a few minutes if you want to share more about the campaign that the village is kicking off.
Sure, and I'll be very quick. Also, I'm sorry that I have to keep my camera off. I'm just running to one thing after another, and I've been traveling and whatnot. So anyways, the Village of Brooklyn, I think many of you know that Karan Lake was a student at Brooklyn Middle School, and he unfortunately is no longer here because someone in the neighborhood took his life. And so the Village of Brooklyn is trying to build an intentional campaign to help heal our community by providing therapeutic resources for the students, for the siblings, and for the school. Mainly Noyes and Brooklyn Middle School that have been hit hard from this tragedy. And then also from what we discovered or what we learned in trying to figure out how can we best support, there is a desire to bring joy back into the schools. And then also we're going to have 3 intentional town hall meetings so that we can work through what it means for how Black youth feel in our community, and deeper discussions as well. So we don't want this incident to happen and then we move forward, but we definitely want to heal. And in the campaign link, there's also additional information of how we got to this point, on how the village started, which was one of the reasons was because students were feeling unsafe in their community. And so we want neighbors to redirect students to be a positive force, and so that they're making, so that everybody's making good decisions together for the investment of our children. So I'm gonna put that message in the link, and also just hope that you all spread the word, because we don't want our youth to feel like their lives are in jeopardy. We want to be redirecting forces so that we can be a healthy community. So I'll send that in there. Please feel free to connect with me if you have any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonna. And I just want to say thank you to Qubilah for being with us and guiding us through a complicated issue, but you've always been very helpful in making it make sense, as much as the budget does make sense. So we appreciate that. And Loretta, do you have anything else you want to share? So I am planning to step down from my role as vice chair of the Ward 5 Education Equity Committee, because it's a lot to do that and be the state board representative. But we will keep you up to date on the process for filling that role in. We need to just double check the bylaws to make sure we do that properly. But we are looking forward to doing that, and I will still be around always. And just thank you for all your support and participation in this group.
I was wondering when you were going to do that, Robert. Thank you all for being here tonight. We will definitely, as Robert said, give you updates on Robert's not really going anywhere. He'll be here. The next steps, but we'll definitely need you all here as we make that shift from Robert being in the role that he currently is in now with the Ward 5 Education Equity Committee. But thank you so much. Thank you for Qubilah for presenting tonight. That's a great presentation. And Robert, thank you for presenting tonight as well. And council members already gone. Have a good evening, everyone. And we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Robert, do you think we'll still try to meet with the schools later this month? I was going to try to chat you, but then I felt like the meeting was going to end.
Yeah. So we definitely will have more information, I think, after. Are you on the LSAT as well as the PTO, or just?
I am.
Have you gotten any updates since the initial budget?
No.
Okay.
It's interesting. I feel like the Boroughs LSAT hasn't been very active. Like we obviously had the meeting that we had to have around the budget, but it wasn't like a super deep dive. So I'll be interested to see what comes out of tomorrow.
Yeah. So
go ahead, Rob.
Just to answer your question, I was planning to do that as long as we have more information to go on. Boroughs is one of two schools, I think, that is in the situation of gaining enrollment and losing funds. And it is hard to know, like, what are those changes forcing to happen on the ground? Like, is it forcing changes in staffing or things like that? It's because we can't tell from the budget documents that we can access. So the more of that kind of information that we can bring together and kind of, so I would love to have that meeting in part to help inform, my testimony to the council, and, as many people as can do that, I think would be important. We did have a few, like I noticed on the call, we had Brookland Middle PTO was here and Langley PTO was here, but I'm not sure anybody else was. So I think it'll be good to have that meeting. Do you think it would be helpful still?
I still think it would. Yeah, I know there was some interest from Boroughs, people who couldn't make tonight, but were kind of interested in keeping in the loop. So I think there would be. Yeah, I'm still open to it. We were thinking next Thursday, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
I'll set that up.
Okay, thank you. Just to avoid sending an email after this, I figured I would just ask enough emails. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Thank you. Robert, you got to stop the recording.
Oh.